The man chiefly responsible for putting this panel together. He's the one who suggested it, and between himself, myself, and Deborah, and finally in getting to Jerry Patrick Hemming, the ironist among them, and I mean a most special ironist among them, was the man responsible for it all, a very good friend, Gordon Winslow.
All right, welcome everybody. We're going to move this along real fast because we have a lot of questions, and I want to give the audience a chance to come up and ask their questions. Now, Jerry has agreed that there is no question that's off limits, but please, if you get up to the microphone, make your whatever you're going to say in the form of a question. Don't get up there and make a statement, because I'll cut you off. The second thing I want to mention is there may be some extreme language used here today, some colorful euphemisms and some nice alliterations. If there's anybody who is offended by this type of language, I would suggest you leave the room now. We're all agreed? Okay. Okay. I'll introduce Mr. Hemming here. This is Gerald Patrick Hemming with a G, and it's G-E-R-R-Y he's called, not Jerry, J-E-R-R-Y. He's an ex-Marine, early supporter of Fidel Castro, disenchanted with Fidel, organized several soldier of fortune and mercenary groups against Castro, now maintains he was patsied in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. My panel of experts here who know everything. My first person on my left is Jerry Rose. Everybody knows Jerry Rose. He has studied the case for over 26 years. He's the editor and publisher of the Fourth Decade, previously the Third Decade, a highly regarded academic journal of research in JFK assassination. And if it's any significance, I've got every issue he's ever published. I was one of the first people that signed up, and it's a very good journal. The second expert we have is Charles Drago. He is a writer, a jazz critic, and lover of the strange and unusual. So some of you may be interested in him. Whose first novel, Autumn Too Long, that's T-O. Well, it's only one O on here.
Well, that's my second novel.
I see. Tells the truth about the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It is scheduled for publication immediately following the appearance of George Michael Vickers' The Iron Sights, which will come when, 2019? Something like that. Yeah. Charles would be the first to tell you that what he contributes to our investigation is not original research, but rather original thinking. The title of his presentation this evening is in the book.
Last evening. Go on to the next one.
He hopes that your reaction to his words will be emotional in the extreme. Okay? John Newman needs no introduction. PhD. I understand. Assistant professor at the University of Maryland, author of JFK in Vietnam, which traces Vietnam policy during the Kennedy administration, and Oswald and the CIA, the first book based on the vast body of new material forced into release by the JFK Records Act of 1992. Dr. Newman has 20 years' experience as a military intelligence officer. So he worked on both sides. Okay, now we're going to start. The way we're going to do this is Mr. Rose will start the questioning, but John, you weren't in on this planning meeting because you were out of town. If you have any question as he's questioning him, a follow-up or something, just jump right in, okay? If you can. The first thing we're going to do is Jerry's going to get up and he's going to give a small or a condensed speech. I'll call it a speech about the questions nobody wants to ask, and he will do it at the podium. Jerry? Oh, now he's going to sit here. You want me to turn you on?
No, this is a strange and unusual one. Yeah,
Okay, does that feel good? Is it working? It says on. What's that?
1, 2, 3.
There, that's on.
Okay.
Got it too close. Excuse me.
Stick it on his beard.
Boy, you got to take a lot of abuse here. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Guten Tag. Konnichiwa. Annyeong haseyo. I'll get a whistle on that. I'm not big on public speaking.
You got to put that closer to your mouth.
I'm big on calories. Burger King. Boy, what a bunch of serious faces here. Everything you've read by Weberman or Marita Lorenz could be true. But it's entertaining too. I don't have a book. I don't speak. Usually there's 2 or 3 people sitting around and they're serious researchers. I spent 30 years trying to get things like this to happen. And I gave stuff to Weisberg and Bill Turner and others. At a time, Turner wasn't even interested, and others weren't even interested in the Kennedy business. As far as questions that weren't asked, one of my favorite TV shows is Jeopardy. And of course, you can lose money if you don't answer who or what with the response. And yesterday's Jeopardy should have had who should have been arrested in the immediate aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. And the winning answer would have been Jerry Patrick Hemming, Mitchell Warbell, Goodell, Lou Conine, and a long list of other people. When that didn't happen, we knew there was a cover-up. The first investigation that was done was the one that would be done regardless of who the president was or is. And that's the people in the national security element. Their first determination is whether they remain at DEFCON 1. Is this a precursor to a preemptive strike or not? That's the first investigation that goes down when there's this type of occurrence. This one was done by Angleton, counterintelligence, and the Office of Security under Edwards and Howard Osborne. After the preemptive strike on CONUS, continental U.S. assessment, was completed, then domestic CIA-CI counterintelligence network, including LIEU, tasked to probe Cosa Nostra, white-collar OC, organized crime, cracker, Dixie Mafia, non-Italian organized crime associates, and associated groups in order to determine whether assassination plots sponsored by them, whether Soviet residents sponsored these elements to accomplish the assassination, whether Cuban, Czech, Bulgar, etc. residents operating with sanction from their respective governments or as rogues utilized these parties, whether U.S. government employees, CIA, FBI, ONI, etc., with or without sanction by a superior, utilized these elements, whether Fortune 100, 500 utilized these elements, whether allies, Taiwan, South Korea, South Vietnam, sponsored them with or without hierarchical sanction or as rogues, whether this was a grudge vendetta, grudge elements, which would include Madame New, Ramphis Trujillo, Papa Doc, etc., et al., were sponsors or sponsorees with organized crime. And a footnote here is rogue residents without Kremlin authority to determine whether Kremlin or autonomous rogue Kremlin elements sanctioned the project was almost impossible task, even for Israeli Mossad, who had the only top penetration agents inside the Soviet Union and still do to this day. And would it risk compromising strategic penetration ops? This was great enough to deter giving this a very high priority. While that was going on, naturally the people were recruited for the Warren Commission. If this was a precursor to a preemptive strike, they had to know right away. That'll probably be the last documents declassified in the 22nd century. If we hadn't lost John Kennedy, the Cold War probably would have ended 20 years ago. If we hadn't lost John Kennedy, we wouldn't have lost a lot of our brothers in Vietnam. We had it made with John Kennedy. He was into special ops, Green Berets, the whole thing. But he stepped on toes. In a federal trial, 1977, I subpoenaed Colonel Lou Conine, Black Luigi, and put him on the witness stand. One of the questions I asked him personally, because I was counsel at the trial, did Madame New circulate money for the Kennedy hit as revenge for the murder of her husband and her brother-in-law 11 days before? Of course, the government objected to the question. Ramphis Trujillo had money out to get the Kennedys for murdering his father. Papa Doc had money out because two plots he had discovered that were given over to him caused him to contribute some money. A lot of money was out. The worst scenario was there was enough money to do more than one job. Over the last 33 years, we've been able to identify two of the shooters. One's dead. These are professionals. They speak foreign languages. They haven't retired. But there were others out there that took money, for instance, from Marcello and Santo, and maybe really believed that they were in support or participating, but they came back for more money. And Marcello and others were worried about the Kennedy family. Do you really believe that the Kennedy dynasty would let somebody get away with that without putting out millions of dollars to track these people down? They did. Marcello was worried. So he hired Garrison to find out, did the people that got the money in New Orleans do the job or not? And Garrison helped prove that they didn't. Well, they were taken care of. So Braden was there for, to make the phone call, a number of people to tell Mickey Cohen and Jack Dragna and the Cellini brothers that the job had been done and they'd earned their money. Hoffa put up money. See, the strange thing in the law is you don't have accessories before and after the fact anymore. You're a principal. Whether you were associated with this loosely, you committed capital murder, whether you're a driver or the guy that helps polish the telescopic sight, you're a principal and you pay the same price. Treason is a capital crime. Aaron Burr found out that taking up arms against the executive is treason in this country. Now Congress has legislated beyond the Constitution to describe exactly what treason and sedition are. And it's spelled out in the statutes. There is no statute of limitations for treason. But let me tell you one thing. People in the business, and they've left their signature on Letellier, MLK, Bobby Kennedy, Schneider, considerable number of people, they're not worried. Just spell their names right. Nobody will ever touch them. The sponsors, the big-time sponsors, they'd be the hardest to prove. The teams don't know who the sponsors are. The teams don't know who the other teams are. They don't even know that they exist. That's why I told Oliver Stone, I said, Rick Rutowski on the fence playing the Dallas cop from the grassy knoll, I said, do a close-up, because when he hears the shots from down the road, he's going to flinch thinking that he's been spotted. Then he'll smirk because he realizes there's a backup team that he wasn't told about. That's how it's done. And it's still done that way. And 30 years ago, if we had large numbers of people like you busting your ass and dedicating time and your sacred honor to uncover these people, these things wouldn't be going on. I guess today you wouldn't have crack cocaine in South Central Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Now, we have another Jerry here, not to be confused. Jerry Rose will start the questioning.
Okay, this is a hard batting position to be in on this panel because Jerry, for his much appreciated eloquence, has not really spoken to us very much yet about his own involvement, accessory or whatever, in the assassination. And it's extremely interesting to me to hear him articulate some of his views, or his, I'm sure he will say his knowledge, about what actually went down on November 22nd, who were the shooters, who were the sponsors, and all, based presumably on post-assassination investigation that he's done of these matters. And probably we should get into, and before we go, I do want us to get into the question of what some of these investigations were that he's done, what he studied, and on whose behalf he did the studies. But I want to focus on the question of Jerry Patrick Hemming as your own experience, your own involvement in the event, and that of your associates. Now, I should say, for the benefit of the audience here, that Charlie and Gordon and I at least have spent probably 2 to 3 hours of pre-interview discussion with Jerry. Very interesting, very, I think, productive, and we have, based on that pre-interview, we have some interests, that some of which we brought and some of which he's encouraged us to have new kinds of interests. But since I'm just one person, and since I have my own peculiar set of interests in the assassination, I don't have, as I've heard Jerry himself express, I don't have any bullshit theory about the assassination that I'm trying to promote. I have an interest area. I'm interested in the domestic right-wing involvement in the assassination, and my questions, as I've told you, they're going to be directed toward people the likes of General Edwin Walker and, well, I would say the right wing from Miami to L.A., which in between important stops in obviously New Orleans and obviously Dallas. Some of my questions are going to be phrased in terms of information, or you may think disinformation or misinformation, having come from one of your self-admitted associates throughout much of 63 at least, Loran Hall. Loran, I think you call him Hall, or Skip. And my questions come somewhat from the interview that Loran Hall gave to Jim Garrison and his staff, and the name of Patrick runs throughout. I mean, it's every other page of Loran Hall's interview. I know your opinion of Loran Hall, and I'll give you a chance to express it. But really, I'm only using Loran Hall for questions that possibilities that he raises that you might or might not want to describe as accurate. Actually, why don't we start with Dallas and the trip that you and some of your, at least one trip that you and some of your associates took there in the, March, April era of 63, what you were doing there and under what circumstances you came into contact with General Walker and his associates, what some of those particular contacts were, and what kind of experience did you have with General Walker in Dallas in April or so of 1963. And if you don't answer some of the questions I have, I'll come back to you for more questions.
That was a question.
Yeah.
While we were making the JFK movie here in Dallas in '91, we found out that Loran Hall had been arrested on a narcotics charge and was being held in a jail in Oklahoma City. And through Gary Shaw and Larry Howard and Bud Fensterwald, we made arrangements that a message would be sent to him that If he would tell the truth as to who recruited him, who he was working for when he came up and agreed to the Silvio business, we'd have the best lawyers in the world beat the narcotics charge for him. But unfortunately, the government beat us to him and made a deal with him. That was the end of that. Hall was an agent provocateur who went to Cuba after Castro took over. He got there in February '59. He had been acquainted with Santo Trafficante in Tampa over a period of a few months prior to that. Santo was in lockup in Havana at the time. The only thing we know is Hall fell in with a group of Nicaraguans that wanted to invade Nicaragua. Only it was a agent provocateur operation. It was a scheme to embarrass Castro. They were all arrested. Hall was thrown into jail in a nut house east of Havana. And he was in a cell right next to Santo Trafficante. That's where I first met him. I arrived on the scene with my personnel, my paratroopers of the rebel army, and we'd just come back from an operation looking for some fugitive war criminals. And quite interestingly, the captain that ran that series of jail cells where Santo was locked up and where some American pilots were locked up and Nicaraguans and Loran Hall, that captain is the same one that later disappeared with Alex Rourke. He was a Castro double agent, Enrique Molina Rivera, and he was a trusted Raul Castro associate. He was pulling a joke on Hall and Santo Trafficante and the gringo pilots. He said, the big guy, when you see him come in a couple of minutes, is here to execute all you bastards. So there was much wetting of pants and the whole thing. And when I discovered the joke, I chastised Rivera on the business, but these people were practically pleading for their lives. The next time Hall shows up is on my mother's doorstep in 1963. He had been deported from Cuba and involved himself in a couple of petty criminal things in Kansas, and then went to work earning a legitimate living until, I presume, FBI people recruited him to do a penetration operation on me while I was on the West Coast. Nobody knew I was on the West Coast. He showed up at my mother's door, told my younger brother he was an old friend from Cuba, American. So I figured that had to be Herman Marx, or the only other American that was alive was Loran Hall. So I said, is that Loran Hall? And he had been directed there by a female reporter that used journalistic cover for the CIA, worked for the Pasadena Star-Tribune. And he was on bureau and probably at least 00 agency payroll. And the whole theory was to get inside the exile groups, just like Oswald and all these other people. So we traveled to the East Coast. He got in difficulty right away. He fell in with Sturgis and some other people. He got some funding from Trafficante, went to No Name Key for a couple of weeks, total failure, went to the West Coast, talked to a bunch of these John Birchers, no money there. That is his history. He was never involved in anti-Castro activities except for a 3-week period on No Name Key when the key was empty. What has he got to say? Somebody said, oh, you were in Dallas and you visited with Silvio.
Yeah, okay.
Jerry, we got to stay on the question here.
Yeah. Well, part of the question was your reaction to Loran Hall, and, you know, I know that's, but could you focus on that particular incident in Dallas? I want you to, excuse me, I want you to talk about names of people. Walker, Lester Logue, Welch, Boats Welch, Robert Morris, if he's part of that story in Dallas. Can you tell us specifically what happened in that particular instance? I know it's just part of a big picture. Pardon me?
In 5 words or less.
Yeah, well, no, as many as you need, but stay on the focused question. I do this reluctantly because I'm fascinated with
We
detail,
approached
but we're going
Walker.
to try to get through some stuff.
We approached Walker when he came back from Germany because some John Birchers who never gave a dime to the Cuban exiles, never did a damn thing. Their excuse was, well, you need somebody like Walker, and if he'll give the word, we'll pour in support. We got funding for Cuban exile operations from wealthy Texans, but they weren't John Birchers. We got money for Tony Cuesta's Commandos L, Alpha 66, number of these commando. When we were against commando operations, we still got them funded. Now, as far as Lester Logue, he was later the chairman of the Republican National Finance Committee, knew everybody. And he was very helpful. And it's strange that some of these personalities, Morris and some of these others who were well known to Bunker Hunt and all these other people, were roped into this business because Oswald was introduced to Bunker Hunt, not H.L. Hunt. And Morris met Oswald. That's the Morris Bishop story and all that. It's very, very, very complicated.
I'm referring to Robert Morris. I don't know whether...
Dolphus Towers. Wealthy Robert Morris. I met him through John Rousselot, congressman from California, seeking support for the Cuban teams.
Okay, if you could move to California and L.A., I've asked you about your familiarity with, I guess we could call it the right-wing crowd in California, a la Minutemen, a la...
I disposed of them in about 2 days. They were totally useless.
What do you mean by dispose?
I met with them and their judges and their lawyers and their Illuminati literati and UFOers and showed them the door.
Did you hear any Kennedy assassination talk among these people?
Including the cab driver.
Pardon me?
Including the cab driver that drove me there.
Well, I'm...
You're talking people with the means, the motive,
Yes, I am.
and the contacts.
Yeah, and
Well,
the organization.
those weren't any of those people. People in Dallas that had the means, the motive, and the money on the table. I met with some of them.
Okay, thank you for being specific here. I want to ask you something, again, I think you can be quite specific about. Operation Red Cross, operating out of course, Florida in, the summer of '63. What was your role in that?
I don't know how it became Red Cross. We had gotten financing from sources in Washington and Baltimore that were parallel intelligence rogues to finance Eduardo Perez, a.k.a. Bayo, to do an operation in Haiti. From 1961, actually 1960, we had this constant thing about doing Fidel. And even in Dallas, you do Fidel and you don't do Raul, and Secret Police Chief Ramiro Valdez and Barbaroja, Redbeard, people like that. Fidel's clumsy. These people aren't. Fidel sat in the mountains for 18 months chewing on cigars. Raul went up in the Sierra Cristal, and 2 months later he had an Air Force. Raul's the dangerous guy. You do him first, don't even mention it again. They were persistent in it. Evidently they'd taken some money. That's why Giancana and those people had me go to the boom room in the Fontainebleau in my, what are called BDUs now, camouflage and bush hat and all that crap. I didn't realize that Santos wanted to see if I was the same guy that made him wet his pants in La Masora holding cell, where he had a couch and a TV. He wasn't suffering any. But once he positively identified me, he wanted me recruited for the Fidel job. See, what you don't get people in the industry over the years. They put two and two together. The Marita Lorenz incident and the Sturgis business. These were operations that were intended to fail. I don't care whether it's an exploding cigar or a seashell that tears up your hemorrhoids or whatever. We trained a guy, a young black Haitian,